They thought the barn was empty, until K9 Zeus stared at the ground and froze. Deputy Sheriff Thomas Marshall watched his German Shepherd's transformation with growing unease. One moment Zeus was trotting beside him through the abandoned Sullivan ranch barn. The next, he'd become a statue, ears forward, body rigid, eyes locked on a seemingly ordinary patch of floor. "What is it, boy?" Thomas whispered, his weathered hand reaching for the flashlight at his belt. Zeus didn't respond to his voice, didn't wag his tail, didn't look up, just stared at that spot with an intensity Thomas had never witnessed in their 3 years together. Then came the whine, a sound so mournful it raised the hairs on Thomas's neck. "We've got 12 hours at most," the voice on Thomas's radio suddenly crackled. "If those kids are down there like you think, they're running out of air. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story." The Sullivan Ranch sat like a weathered skeleton on the outskirts of Oak Ridge County, Georgia. Once a thriving horse breeding operation, it had fallen into disrepair after old man Sullivan passed away 5 years earlier. His children, scattered across different states, couldn't agree on what to do with the property, so it sat, forgotten by most except local teenagers looking for a place to drink beer on Saturday nights. Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead as the late June sun beat down mercilessly. At 58, he had seen just about everything during his 32 years with the Oak Ridge County Sheriff's Department. His weathered face, lined with wrinkles that mapped out decades of both joy and sorrow, had the permanent squint of a man who'd spent too many hours staring into the distance searching for answers. "Dispatch said someone reported strange noises last night," Thomas muttered to Zeus. "Probably just kids or maybe some wildlife." Zeus, the 7-year-old German Shepherd, hadn't been born into service. The dog had been rescued from a fighting ring 3 years earlier, scarred, malnourished, and terrified of human contact. The vet had recommended euthanasia, claiming the dog was too damaged to rehabilitate. But Thomas, fresh from losing his wife Eleanor to cancer and drinking himself to sleep each night, had seen something in Zeus's eyes, a resilience, a will to survive despite everything. So Thomas took him home, sleeping on the floor beside the trembling animal for weeks until Zeus could trust again. They had saved each other, really. The property stretched out before them, the main house with its peeling white paint, the red barn that had faded to a dusty pink, and several smaller outbuildings scattered around like abandoned children. The summer heat created rippling waves above the parched ground, cicadas buzzing in a constant monotonous chorus. Thomas had walked the perimeter methodically, Zeus trotting beside him. Nothing seemed amiss until they entered the barn. The doors had creaked as Thomas pushed them open, sending a family of barn swallows fluttering into the rafters. Dust particles danced in the slanted beams of sunlight that cut through the gaps in the roof. And then Zeus had stopped, transformed from working dog to sentinel in an instant. Thomas knelt down, his arthritic knee protesting as he examined the section of flooring that had captured Zeus's attention. The wooden planks seemed newer there, the spacing slightly different from the rest of the floor. "What have we got here, boy?" he murmured, running his fingers along the seams. His radio crackled again. "Marshall, confirm your situation. Do you need backup?" Thomas keyed his radio. "Send everyone available to the Sullivan place. And get me shovels, pry bars, anything that can move floorboards. I think we've got something here." "Copy that." "What exactly are we looking for?" Thomas watched Zeus lower his belly to the floor, pressing himself against the wood as if trying to get closer to whatever was beneath. "I'm not sure yet," Thomas replied, his voice tight. "But whatever it is, Zeus is telling me we need to hurry." Thomas's mind drifted back as they waited for backup to arrive, Zeus still frozen in position. The dog's dedication reminded him of that terrible day 15 years ago at Lake Milford. The memory remained as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. the kind of memory that brands itself into your soul and changes you forever. It had been a perfect summer Sunday. Eleanor had packed a picnic lunch, and Michael, their 10-year-old son, had been skipping rocks across the water while Thomas grilled burgers. Thomas remembered glancing up at the sound of screaming and seeing a teenage girl thrashing in the water, her canoe capsized nearby. Without hesitation, Thomas had dove in, swimming powerfully toward her. He'd been a rescue swimmer in the Gulf War, and his training took over. "I'll be right back," he'd called to Eleanor and Michael. "Stay put." The rescue had taken less than 5 minutes. Thomas had reached the panicking girl, calmed her down, and towed her safely to shore. People had gathered, patting him on the back, calling him a hero. It was only when he looked around for his family that he realized something was wrong. Eleanor was running along the shoreline, screaming Michael's name. Thomas would later piece together what had happened. Michael, seeing his father rescue someone, had tried to retrieve the girl's floating paddle. The lake had a steep underwater drop-off that Michael hadn't known about. One moment he was in shallow water, the next he was in over his head, and Thomas, the trained rescuer, the hero, hadn't been there to save his own son. They found Michael's body 3 hours later. Thomas had refused to leave the water, diving again and again until his muscles seized, and another rescuer had to drag him to shore. "He's gone, Thomas," they'd said. "He's gone." Eleanor never blamed him, not openly, but Thomas saw it in her eyes sometimes, the unspoken question, "Why could you save a stranger but not our son?" It was the same question that haunted his dreams, that drove him to the bottle after she was gone. Eleanor had lasted another 7 years before the cancer took her. By then, Thomas was a shell of himself, working mechanically through his shifts, coming home to an empty house that echoed with memories. Their 2 older children, Martha and James, had moved away, Martha to Atlanta, James to the Army. They called occasionally, visited on holidays, but the family had fractured along with Thomas's heart. The day Thomas found Zeus had been the 1st anniversary of Eleanor's death, which was also the 8th anniversary of Michael's drowning. Thomas had been contemplating his service revolver that morning, turning it over in his hands, wondering if there was any point in continuing this hollow existence. He'd gone to the liquor store for what he'd decided would be his final bottle. On the way home, he'd passed the county animal shelter. A hand-painted sign declared Last Chance Adoption Day. Something, maybe Eleanor's voice in his head, had made him turn into the parking lot. The shelter volunteer had been hesitant to even show him Zeus. "He's scheduled to be euthanized tomorrow," she'd explained. "Fighting dog, too aggressive for adoption." But Thomas had insisted on seeing him. Zeus had been huddled in the back of his kennel, ears flat, ribs showing through his dull coat. When Thomas approached, the dog had growled, but there was something in his eyes. Not aggression, but fear. Profound, consuming fear. "He's been through hell," the volunteer had explained. "Found in a raid on a fighting ring. They think he was a bait dog before they tried to train him to fight. He watched his kennel mate get killed in the ring." Thomas had knelt slowly, ignoring the warning growl. "You and me both, buddy," he'd said quietly. "You and me both." He'd adopted Zeus that day. The first few weeks had been a nightmare. Zeus had cowered from every movement, bared his teeth at shadows. Thomas had set up a bed in the living room, but found Zeus trembling in a corner instead. So Thomas had dragged his mattress onto the floor and slept there, night after night, not touching the dog, but just being present, talking softly about Eleanor, about Michael, about all the pain bottled up inside him. Somewhere in those long nights, as Thomas poured out his heart to an audience that couldn't judge him, something had shifted. Zeus had inched closer, night by night. Eventually, Thomas had awakened to find the dog pressed against his back, as if each was protecting the other from the darkness. The sheriff had suggested training Zeus as a canine officer, partly as a joke, partly to give Thomas something to focus on besides grief. To everyone's surprise, Zeus had taken to the training with remarkable intelligence. He'd never become a traditional police dog, too traumatized for aggression work, but he'd developed an uncanny talent for search and rescue, particularly with children. Their first real success had been finding a 6-year-old girl with autism who had wandered away from a campsite. Other search dogs had failed, but Zeus had tracked her scent through a thunderstorm, leading Thomas to a small cave where the child had taken shelter. When they'd approached, the girl had been frightened of Thomas, but had immediately reached for Zeus, burying her face in his fur. That case had made the local news. "Hero Dog with a Troubled Past Saves Lost Child," the headline had read. Thomas had taped the article to his refrigerator, the first thing he'd cared enough about to preserve in years. There had been other cases since then. Zeus seemed to have a special sense about children in distress, an ability to find them when other dogs couldn't. The department psychologist had a theory that Zeus's own trauma had heightened his empathy, made him more attuned to fear and suffering. The training officer had a simpler explanation. "That dog knows what it's like to be scared and alone. He doesn't want anyone else to feel that way." Thomas had started to heal, though the wound would never fully close. He'd cut back on the drinking, started having Sunday dinners with Martha and her family when they could make the drive from Atlanta. He'd even begun attending church again, sitting in the back pew, not quite believing, but wanting to. Zeus had given Thomas purpose, and in return Thomas had given Zeus the one thing the dog had never known: safety. They'd become inseparable, two broken souls finding a way forward together, and now, watching Zeus pressed against that suspicious section of barn floor, Thomas felt a strange sense of destiny. Eleanor had always said there were no coincidences, only God's fingerprints on our lives. Thomas wasn't sure about God anymore, but he trusted Zeus with absolute certainty. As he waited for backup, Thomas's mind caught on something, a name that had been mentioned in the initial report. The Sullivan property had been visited several times by a man claiming to be interested in purchasing it. The real estate agent had described him as a professional type, very particular about measurements. The name had been familiar to Thomas, but he couldn't place it. Richard Gaines. The name floated in Thomas's memory, triggering something just beyond his grasp. He knew that name from somewhere, sometime before, something unpleasant. Thomas was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of approaching vehicles. Backup had arrived. Zeus hadn't moved, still pressed against the floor, occasionally emitting that soul-piercing whine. "Hang on, boy," Thomas murmured, placing a gentle hand on Zeus's back. "We'll figure this out." He could feel the dog trembling beneath his palm, as if Zeus was hearing something, or someone, that no human ear could detect. Deputies Williams and Rodriguez arrived first, followed by Sergeant Elliott. The three officers approached Thomas cautiously, eyeing Zeus's unusual behavior. "What have you got, Tom?" Elliott asked, his face already glistening with sweat in the oppressive heat. "Not sure yet. Zeus is fixated on this section of flooring." Thomas pointed to the area. "Look at the boards. They're newer. Different spacing. Someone replaced this section and tried to make it look original." Elliott crouched down, examining the seams Thomas had pointed out. His fingers traced the edges where newer wood met old. "Could be nothing. Old buildings get repairs." "When was the last time anyone set foot in this place to do repairs?" Thomas countered. "Besides, look at Zeus." The dog hadn't acknowledged the arrival of the other officers, hadn't moved from his position. His eyes were closed now, but his body remained tense, alert, his ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. "All right," Elliott conceded. "Let's take a look. Rodriguez, get the pry bar." The younger officer jogged back to his vehicle, returning with tools. He handed Thomas a crowbar, keeping one for himself. "Careful now," Thomas instructed. "If there's something or someone down there, we don't want to cause any harm." It took them 15 minutes of careful work to lift the first board. Beneath it was tightly packed dirt, nothing unusual for an old barn floor. But Zeus's reaction intensified. He began to tremble, a low growl building in his chest. "Keep going," Thomas urged. They removed another board and another. By the fourth board, they discovered something that made them all fall silent. The dirt underneath had been disturbed. It wasn't the hard, packed earth of decades. It was looser, more recently moved. "Get the shovels," Elliot ordered, his voice tight. Williams returned to the cruisers, bringing back 3 shovels. The men began to dig carefully, methodically, the only sounds in the barn being the scrape of metal against dirt and Zeus's increasingly agitated whining. 2 feet down, Rodriguez's shovel hit something with a hollow sound. "Hold up," he said. They cleared away more dirt, revealing what appeared to be a sheet of plywood. Thomas felt his heart rate accelerate. Whatever was under that plywood, it wasn't supposed to be found. Zeus was pacing now, circling the hole they'd dug, whining continuously. Thomas had never seen the dog so disturbed. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own hands were far from steady. Elliot and Williams positioned themselves on either side of the plywood. "On 3, Elliot said. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the plywood sheet, and the barn filled with the unmistakable smell of human waste, sweat, and fear. Thomas's flashlight beam cut through the darkness below, illuminating a crude underground chamber. And in that beam of light, 4 pairs of eyes, wide, sunken, terrified, stared back. Children. 4 children, huddled together in filth and darkness. "Jesus Christ," Williams whispered. Thomas felt his world tilt. In 32 years of law enforcement, he'd seen terrible things. Car accidents that turned families into memories in an instant, domestic violence that left permanent scars, drug overdoses that stole futures. But this, children buried alive beneath a forgotten barn, this was evil of a different magnitude. "Call for ambulances, now!" Elliot barked at Rodriguez, who was frozen in shock. "And get child services on the phone." Thomas was already lowering himself into the hole, heart pounding. "It's okay," he said, his voice cracking. "You're safe now. We're police officers. We're here to help you." The children didn't respond, didn't move. The oldest, a girl who couldn't be more than 12, held the others protectively. Their clothes were filthy, their bodies thin to the point of emaciation. How long had they been down here? Zeus, who had been pacing anxiously above, suddenly jumped down into the hole beside Thomas, ignoring all training protocols. But instead of frightening the children further, something remarkable happened. The smallest child, a boy perhaps 6 or 7 years old, reached out a trembling hand toward the dog. "You came," the boy whispered, his voice so faint Thomas barely heard it. "We heard you." Zeus approached gently, all signs of agitation gone, and lay down beside the children. The boy buried his fingers in Zeus's fur, and then began to cry, silent tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "He heard us," the boy repeated, "when no one else did." Thomas reached out slowly, careful not to frighten the child. "I'm Deputy Marshal, Thomas Marshall. This is Zeus. Can you tell me your name, son?" The boy looked at Thomas with eyes too old for his young face. "Noah," he whispered. "My name is Noah." "Noah," Thomas repeated. "That's a good name, a strong name. We're going to get you out of here, Noah. You and your friends. You're safe now." The oldest girl spoke then, her voice hoarse. "Are you really here? Or are we dreaming again?" Thomas felt his heart break a little more. "We're really here, sweetheart. I promise you. What's your name?" "Lily," she said. "That's Emma and Michael." She pointed to the other 2 children, a girl of about 8 and a boy around 10. The name Michael hit Thomas like a physical blow. He pushed the reaction aside, focusing on the immediate need. "How long have you been down here, Lily?" She shook her head. "Since school ended. The man said we were bad and needed to be punished." School had ended for summer break almost 3 weeks ago. Thomas struggled to keep his expression neutral despite his horror. Above them, they could hear sirens approaching. Elliot called down, "Ambulances are 3 minutes out. How are they?" "Alive," Thomas called back. "Dehydrated, malnourished. We need to get them out carefully." The extraction took nearly an hour. Paramedics arrived, assessing the children's condition before carefully bringing them up one by one on backboards. Noah refused to be separated from Zeus, screaming when the paramedics tried to move him away from the dog. "The dog goes with him," Thomas told the paramedics firmly. "Zeus rides in the ambulance." Elliot didn't object, just nodded grimly. "Go with them, Tom. We'll handle things here." As Thomas climbed into the ambulance beside the stretcher holding Noah, Zeus jumped in and immediately lay down beside the boy, who grabbed the dog's fur like a lifeline. The paramedic raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she inserted an IV into the child's thin arm. "Did you know the man who put you there, Noah?" Thomas asked gently as the ambulance began to move. Noah shook his head. "Well, he said he was a friend of Miss Jenkins from school. He had a teacher badge." "What did he look like?" Noah's eyes clouded. "Old. Like you. Gray hair. Glasses. He smiled a lot, but not with his eyes." "Did he tell you his name?" "Dr. Gaines," Noah said. "He said to call him Dr. Gaines." Thomas felt a chill run through him. Richard Gaines. Now he remembered. Doctor. Richard Gaines had been his therapist briefly after Michael's death. Thomas had stopped seeing him because something about the man had made him uncomfortable. There had been rumors later, something about inappropriate behavior with young patients. "He gave us water sometimes, and crackers," Noah continued. "But then he stopped coming." "When did he stop coming, Noah? Do you remember?" The boy's forehead wrinkled with concentration. "Before the light broke. We had a little light, but it stopped working." "How long ago was that?" "A long time. We were so thirsty." Lily found some water dripping from the ceiling. "We took turns drinking it." Thomas swallowed hard. "You're very brave, Noah. All of you." Noah didn't respond, just stroked Zeus's head with painfully thin fingers. The dog stayed perfectly still, only his eyes moving to look up at Thomas, eyes that seemed to say, "I knew they were there. I knew you'd understand if I showed you." At the hospital, the children were rushed to different treatment rooms, doctors and nurses swarming around them. Noah screamed again when they tried to separate him from Zeus, his cries echoing down the antiseptic hallways. "Please," Thomas appealed to the attending physician, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair. "The dog is a trained canine. He's clean, he's calm, and right now he seems to be the only thing keeping that boy from complete panic." The doctor hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But the animal stays on the floor, not the bed." "And you're responsible for him, Deputy." Thomas nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Doctor. Winters. Elizabeth Winters." She gave Zeus an appraising look. "What made your dog find those children? They were well hidden." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I wish I knew. He just knew." Dr. Winters' expression softened slightly. "Well, whatever sixth sense that animal has, those children are alive because of it. They wouldn't have lasted much longer down there." As Noah was being examined, Thomas stepped into the hallway to call Elliot for an update. The sergeant's voice was grim. "We found a setup down there, Thomas. Air pipes that had been deliberately crushed, recent footprints. Whoever put those kids there intended for them to run out of air. If you and Zeus hadn't found them today—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Thomas knew exactly what would have happened. 4 small coffins, 4 sets of grieving parents. 4 lives ended before they'd really begun. "Any ID on the kids yet?" Thomas asked. "Working on it. They match descriptions of children reported missing from different counties over the past month. We're contacting the families now." Elliot paused. "The boy mentioned a Dr. Gaines?" "Richard Gaines," Thomas confirmed. "Former child psychologist. Had his license revoked about 5 or 6 years ago. I need you to put out an APB immediately." "Already done. We found prescription bottles with his name on them down there. Sedatives." Thomas ended the call and returned to Noah's room. The boy was sleeping now, sedated to help him through the various medical procedures. Zeus lay on the floor beside the bed, eyes open, watchful. A social worker approached Thomas in the hallway, clipboard in hand. "Deputy Marshal? I'm Grace Chen from Child Services. I need to ask you about the boy, Noah." "What about him?" "We've been checking missing persons reports. There's no Noah matching his description reported missing in this state or any surrounding states in the past 6 months." Thomas frowned. "That's impossible. He's what, 6 or 7? Someone has to be looking for him." Grace shook her head. "We're expanding the search, but it's concerning. The other 3 children were reported missing immediately by their families. Noah seems to have fallen through the cracks somehow." Thomas glanced back at the sleeping child. Who was he? And why wasn't anyone looking for him? The questions would have to wait. For now, Noah was safe, and that was what mattered. Thomas settled into the chair beside the hospital bed, Zeus at his feet. They would stand guard together, keeping the nightmares at bay for as long as necessary. By midnight, the hospital corridor outside the children's rooms had become an impromptu command center. Thomas sat with a cup of cooling coffee, Zeus still at his feet as Sergeant Elliot brought him up to speed. "We've confirmed identities for 3 of the 4 children," Elliot said, keeping his voice low. "Lily Andrews, 11, reported missing from her summer school program in Fairview County 3 weeks ago. Emma Pearson, 8, disappeared from a mall in Cooper County around the same time. Michael Davidson, 10, vanished from his front yard in our county 18 days ago." "And Noah?" Thomas asked. Elliot shook his head. "Still nothing. No missing person report matching his description. We're running his prints now, checking against the birth record database." Thomas frowned. "How does a 6-year-old boy go missing without anyone reporting it? Foster system, maybe? Kids fall through the cracks sometimes." Elliot hesitated. "Or maybe whoever was supposed to be watching him was involved somehow." The thought made Thomas's stomach turn. He glanced through the half-open door at Noah's small form in the hospital bed. The boy had awakened briefly when the doctors were finished, asked for Zeus, then fallen back into exhausted sleep with his hand dangling off the bed, fingers just touching the dog's fur. "What about Gaines?" Thomas asked. "APB is out statewide. We've got officers at his last known residence and office." Elliot paused. "Tom, I need to ask, you said you knew him?" Thomas nodded slowly. "After my son drowned, after Eleanor got sick, I was in a bad place, drinking too much. The department mandated counseling. Gaines was one of the therapists on the approved list." "What was your impression of him?" Thomas considered the question. Something was off. He was too interested in Michael, wanted details about the drowning that seemed unnecessary. And he kept steering our sessions toward my work with child victims, wanting to know how they reacted to trauma. "Did you report these concerns?" "Eventually. After I stopped seeing him, I heard rumors from another officer that Gaines had been inappropriate with some child patients. I filed a formal complaint with the licensing board. There was an investigation." Elliot's expression darkened. "And that's when his license was revoked." "Yes, I testified at the hearing." Thomas ran a hand over his face. "I'd almost forgotten about it. It was during Eleanor's worst days with the cancer. Everything from that time is a blur." Well, he certainly remembered you, Elliot said grimly. We found something else in that hole, Tom. Photos of you. Surveillance photos. He's been watching you. Thomas felt a chill run through him. For how long? Some of the photos date back at least a year. This wasn't random, Tom. He targeted those kids, and it had something to do with you. Before Thomas could respond, Dr. Winters approached, her expression grave. Deputy Marshal, could I speak with you a moment? Thomas followed her to a quiet corner, Zeus padding silently behind him. The children are stabilizing physically, she said. Dehydration, malnutrition, minor infections, all treatable. But I'm concerned about Noah. What's wrong? His blood work shows something interesting. He has a rare genetic marker. Nothing dangerous, just unusual. I've only seen it a few times in my career. She paused. One of those times was when your son was brought in after the drowning accident. Thomas stared at her. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a possibility that Noah is related to you somehow. Dr. Winters kept her voice gentle. The chances of randomly sharing this marker are extremely low. Thomas felt as if the floor were shifting beneath him. That's impossible. I only had 3 children. Michael died. Martha and James are adults. Is there any possibility that Michael fathered a child before he died? He would have been, 15? No, Thomas said automatically. But even as he spoke, a memory surfaced. Michael, nervous, asking about girls, about respect and responsibility. Thomas had assumed it was just adolescent interest, had given him the usual father-son talk. Had there been more to it? We're running a DNA comparison now, Dr. Winters said. With your permission, of course. Thomas nodded numbly. Of course. He returned to Noah's room in a daze, his mind racing. Could it be possible? Could Noah be Michael's son? A grandson Thomas never knew existed? The boy stirred in his sleep, his face relaxing slightly as Zeus pressed closer to the bed. The resemblance to Michael at that age was there, the curve of the jaw, the shape of the ears. How had Thomas not seen it before? His phone vibrated with a text from Elliot. Found Gaines. Sunshine Motel, room 14. Deceased. Apparent suicide. Thomas excused himself, leaving Zeus with Noah, and called Elliot from the hallway. What happened? Overdose? Pills and alcohol? Left a note. Elliot's voice was tight. Tom, it's bad. He mentions you by name. Says this was payback for taking everything from him. The license revocation? That and something more personal. The note rambles, but he claims you took his son away too. And now he's balanced the scales. Thomas tried to make sense of this. I never took anyone's son. I didn't even know he had children. We're digging into his background now. But there's more, Tom. The note mentions final preparations and special children who needed purifying. He talks about other locations. Thomas's blood ran cold. There are more kids? We don't know yet. Crime scene techs are going through his motel room looking for clues. But if there are, we're on borrowed time. The note implies some kind of countdown. I need to get back to the station, Thomas said. No, you need to stay there. If this is personal, if he targeted you specifically, those kids, especially Noah, need protection. We've got officers heading to the hospital now. Thomas reluctantly agreed, ending the call just as Grace Chen, the social worker, approached with a tablet in hand. Deputy Marshal, we've found something about Noah. She showed him the screen displaying a case file. Noah Gaines, age 6. Reported missing by his mother, Rebecca Gaines, 3 weeks ago. Gaines? Thomas echoed. As in Richard Gaines? His daughter-in-law. She's currently in rehab for opioid addiction. The report was filed by the rehab center when she became distraught, claiming her father-in-law had taken Noah for a special trip and wasn't answering calls. Where's Noah's father? Jason Gaines died of an overdose last year. Grace scrolled through the file. It looks like the local police didn't pursue the case aggressively because Richard Gaines had partial custody. They assumed it was a family matter, not an abduction. Thomas felt sick. And Rebecca? Does she know we've found Noah? We're contacting the rehab center now. But there's more. Grace hesitated. Rebecca's maiden name was Patterson. She attended Oak Ridge High School 15 years ago. Thomas stared at her. Patterson. The name triggered another memory. A girl Michael had mentioned a few times. Jenny Patterson. Are you saying... We don't know for certain yet, Grace said carefully. But given the timeline and the connection, it's possible that Noah's mother knew your son. Thomas returned to Noah's room in a state of shock. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture too terrible to contemplate. If Noah was Michael's son and Richard Gaines knew it... His thoughts were interrupted by Noah's small voice. You're still here. Thomas looked up to find the boy awake, his hand still resting on Zeus's head. Of course I am, Thomas said, moving to sit beside the bed. How are you feeling? Okay. Noah studied Thomas's face with those unnervingly old eyes. Are you my grandpa? The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. Why would you ask that, Noah? Dr. Gaines said he was taking me to meet my real grandpa, that my real grandpa took away his son, so he was going to take away his grandson. Noah's voice was matter-of-fact, reciting rather than interpreting. But then we went to the dark place instead. Thomas struggled to keep his expression neutral. Noah, did Dr. Gaines talk about other children? Other special children like you? Noah nodded. He said we were all chosen, that we needed to be prepared for what was coming. What was coming, Noah? The darkness. Noah's eyes filled with tears. He said we had to learn to live in the darkness because that's what our parents deserved. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Deputy, there's a call for you at the station. They say it's urgent. Thomas excused himself, promising Noah he'd return quickly. Zeus stayed by the bed, watchful as ever. At the nurse's station, Thomas took the call from Elliot. What have you got? We found maps in Gaines's motel room. Tom, there are 3 other sites marked. All abandoned properties. A water treatment plant, an old church, and a cemetery on the edge of town. He has more children hidden, Thomas said, his voice hollow. We think so. Teams are mobilizing now, but these locations are spread out. It'll take hours to search them all thoroughly. The kids don't have hours, Thomas said. From what Noah said, Gaines was depriving them of light, water, and eventually air. It's some sick form of punishment. Punishment for what? For being connected to people he blamed for his downfall. Thomas took a deep breath. Elliot, I need to tell you something. I think Noah is my grandson. I think Michael fathered a child before he died, and somehow Gaines found out. There was a long pause on the line. Jesus, Tom. If that's true, then this is all connected to me. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Those other children, they might be connected to other people involved in Gaines's license revocation, judges, witnesses, board members. We're running background checks now on the other 3 children we rescued, looking for connections. Elliot's voice turned urgent. Tom, we need Noah's help. If he was with Gaines the longest, if Gaines talked to him, he's 6 years old, Sergeant, and traumatized. I know, but there are other children out there running out of air. We need to know which site to prioritize. Thomas knew Elliot was right. As much as he wanted to protect Noah from further trauma, other lives were at stake. I'll talk to him, Thomas agreed reluctantly, but only with Dr. Winters present. When Thomas returned to Noah's room, he found Dr. Winters already there, checking the boy's vital signs. Zeus had somehow migrated onto the foot of the bed with the doctor pretending not to notice the breach of her rules. Thomas pulled her aside and quickly explained the situation. She frowned deeply but agreed to monitor the conversation, ready to intervene if Noah became too distressed. Thomas sat gently on the edge of the bed. "Noah, I need to ask you some more questions about Dr. Gaines. It's very important. There might be other children like you, and we need to find them quickly." Noah looked at Zeus, then back at Thomas. "He said you wouldn't believe me." "Who said that, Noah?" "Dr. Gaines. He said adults never believe children. That's why we needed to be punished, because no one would listen to us." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "I'm listening now, Noah. I promise." Noah was quiet for a moment, his small fingers tangled in Zeus's fur. "He took us to different places first, before the barn." "What places, Noah? Do you remember?" "A big building with water tanks, a church with broken windows, a place with stone angels." The boy's voice was flat, reciting from memory. "He said we each had a special place waiting." "Did he take other children to these places?" Noah nodded slowly. "He said everyone had to learn the lesson. Everyone who took away his future." Thomas exchanged a glance with Dr. Winters, whose face had paled. "Noah, this is very important. Do you know which place has children in it right now?" Noah closed his eyes, his forehead wrinkling with concentration. "The angels," he finally said. "The stone angels are watching over them now." The cemetery. Thomas immediately reached for his phone to call Elliot, but Noah grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "He said they'd run out of air when the moon is highest," the boy whispered. "He said that's when souls are ready to travel." Thomas checked his watch. Just past midnight. If Gaines was referring to when the moon reached its apex. "When is the moon highest, Noah? Did he say?" Noah shook his head. "But he showed me on his watch. The little hand on the 2, the big hand on the 12. 2 a.m., less than 2 hours away." Thomas quickly called Elliot, relaying the information. "Focus everything on the cemetery. We have less than 2 hours." "On it," Elliot replied. "County Cemetery on Old Mill Road?" "That would be my guess. It's the oldest one with the most elaborate headstones. Stone angels." Thomas hesitated. "I'm coming too. Tom, you should stay with the boy. Noah's safe here." "There are officers outside his door. But those other kids—" Thomas couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm coming, and I'm bringing Zeus." Thomas turned to Dr. Winters. "Will Noah be all right if we leave for a while?" She nodded. "I'll stay with him myself." Thomas knelt beside the bed. "Noah, Zeus and I need to go help those other children now. Dr. Winters will stay with you. We'll be back as soon as we can." Noah looked at him with those old eyes. "You promise?" "I promise." "Then you should hurry," the boy said. "The angels are getting tired of watching." As Thomas and Zeus rushed out of the hospital, the weight of what was happening hit him fully. Richard Gaines, a man he'd encountered briefly years ago, had orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme targeting innocent children with connections to those who had ended his career. And somehow, at the center of it all, was the grandson Thomas never knew he had. Zeus seemed to sense the urgency, staying close to Thomas's side as they hurried to the cruiser. As they drove toward the cemetery, lights flashing but siren silent, Thomas found himself praying for the first time since Eleanor's death. "Please," he whispered to the night, "not more children. Not again." Zeus whined softly from the back seat as if in agreement. The road to Old Mill Cemetery stretched before Thomas like a ribbon of darkness, broken only by the sweep of his headlights. He pressed the accelerator harder, feeling the cruiser surge forward as the dashboard clock ticked over to 12:45 a.m. Just over an hour left, if Noah's information was correct. His mind raced back to his brief encounters with Richard Gaines, searching for clues he might have missed. The therapy sessions had been during his darkest period, the months following Michael's death when Eleanor's cancer diagnosis was still fresh. Thomas had been going through the motions, showing up because the department required it, not because he believed talking would help. "Tell me about your son," Gaines had said during their second session, leaning forward with an intensity that Thomas had found off-putting. "Tell me exactly what happened when he drowned." Thomas had recounted the story mechanically, the way he'd done for the official report, for the grief counselor at Michael's school, for the well-meaning neighbors who brought casseroles and awkward condolences. "And you were saving someone else," Gaines had pressed. "A stranger. You chose a stranger over your own child." The accusation had cut through Thomas's numbness. "I didn't choose anyone. I didn't know Michael was in danger. But if you'd been watching him instead of playing hero..." Gaines had let the sentence hang there, poisonous in its implication. It was the same accusation Thomas had hurled at himself countless times in the dark hours of the night. The same guilt that had driven him to the bottle. But hearing it from this man, this stranger with the two intense eyes, had sparked something like anger. "We're done here," Thomas had said, standing up. "I'll find another counselor." Gaines had smiled thinly. "Running away won't bring your son back, Deputy Marshal. Nothing will. That's a pain you'll carry forever." Thomas had walked out, requested a different therapist, and thought little more about Richard Gaines until the rumors started circulating a few months later. A fellow officer had mentioned concerns about Gaines's conduct with young patients, particularly those who had experienced trauma. The officer's niece had been seeing Gaines after a car accident and had reported uncomfortable questions, unnecessary physical examinations. Thomas had added his own concerns to the formal complaint. He'd testified at the licensing board hearing almost as an afterthought, one more duty in a life that had become a series of mechanical actions. He'd barely registered Gaines's presence in the room, had avoided looking at the man. But Gaines had been looking at him, had apparently been watching him ever since. The radio crackled, pulling Thomas back to the present. "All units be advised we have a tactical team en route to Old Mill Cemetery. ETA 10 minutes. Fire and rescue standing by." Thomas glanced at the dashboard clock again. 12:52 a.m. The tactical team would arrive just after 1 o'clock a.m., less than an hour to locate and rescue any children hidden in a 15-acre cemetery filled with mausoleums, elaborate headstones, and centuries-old trees. He pressed the accelerator harder. Zeus whined from the back seat, sensing Thomas's tension. The dog had been extraordinary today, finding children no human could have detected. Thomas could only pray that Zeus's uncanny abilities would work again. The cemetery gates came into view, rusted iron arching above a gravel drive. Thomas could see other patrol cars already parked outside, officers gathering in a pool of flashlight beams. He pulled in beside them, releasing Zeus from the back seat. Sergeant Elliott approached, his face grim in the harsh light. "Tom, you shouldn't be here." "This is too personal." "That's exactly why I need to be here." Thomas cut him off. "Gaines did this because of me. Those kids are down there because of me." Elliott started to argue, then stopped, recognizing the futility. "Fine, but you stay with the search team. No lone wolf heroics." Thomas nodded, attaching Zeus's lead. The dog was already alert, nose working the air, body tense with purpose. The cemetery sprawled before them, a maze of stone and shadow. Ancient oaks cast massive silhouettes against the starlit sky, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers above crumbling tombstones and moss-covered monuments. In daylight, it might have seemed peaceful. At night, it held a heavy silence that pressed against the skin like a physical thing. "How do we do this?" one of the younger officers asked. "Place is huge." "We split into teams," Elliott decided. "Grid search. Look for any sign of disturbed ground, New construction? Anything out of place?" "The angels," Thomas reminded them. "Noah said stone angels were watching over them." An older officer, Jenkins, spoke up. "There's an area in the northeast corner with a bunch of Victorian monuments, a lot of angel statues there." "That's where we'll start," Elliot said. "Thomas, you and Zeus take point." Thomas unclipped Zeus's lead, giving him the search command. The dog hesitated only a moment before trotting forward, nose to the ground, leading them into the cemetery's depths. The officers followed in a loose formation, flashlight beams crisscrossing the darkness. They passed through sections of simple headstones, then more elaborate family plots with low stone borders. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the cemetery, as if the ground itself was exhaling a chilled breath from below. Zeus paused occasionally, investigating a scent, then moving on. Thomas checked his watch compulsively. 1:15 a.m. The tactical team had arrived, spreading out to cover more ground. In the distance, Thomas could hear other search teams calling to each other, flashlights bobbing like fireflies among the stones. They reached the northeast corner, where Victorian-era monuments rose like pale ghosts in the darkness. Stone angels with weathered faces gazed sightlessly from atop pedestals and mausoleums, some with hands clasped in prayer, others with arms outstretched in blessing or warning. Zeus grew more animated, circling a particular area, nose working furiously. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken. The dog was on to something. "Here," he called to the others. "Zeus has something." The officers converged as Zeus focused on a large monument, a life-sized angel standing atop a rectangular base, its wings spread wide, face tilted toward heaven. The statue itself wasn't unusual for this section of the cemetery, but Zeus's behavior certainly was. The dog wasn't just alert, he was agitated, pawing at the ground around the monument's base, whining with increasing urgency. Thomas knelt beside Zeus, running his hands over the base of the monument. It seemed solid, unmovable. But as his fingers traced the seam where stone met earth, he felt a slight draft, air moving where it shouldn't be. "There's something here," he called to Elliot. "Air's coming from somewhere." The tactical team moved in with equipment, examining the monument from all angles. One officer noticed a small symbol carved into the back of the angel's base, recently carved, the stone dust still visible in the crevices. "Look at this," he said, shining his light on the marking. It wasn't a typical cemetery symbol, not a cross or a religious inscription. It was a simple drawing of an hourglass. "Time running out," Thomas murmured. "He's taunting us." A tactical officer ran his hands along the base of the monument, pressing in different spots. Suddenly, there was a click, and one side of the rectangular base shifted slightly. "It's a door," the officer said in disbelief. "The whole base is hollow." It took 4 men to slide the stone panel open, revealing a dark space beneath. The smell that wafted out was familiar to Thomas now. The same combination of fear, waste, and despair they'd encountered at the barn. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a set of crude steps leading downward. "Hello?" he called down. "Police officers. Is anyone down there?" At first there was only silence, then so faint he almost missed it. A whimper. Zeus was already moving, trying to push past Thomas to get down the steps. The tactical team leader blocked them both. "Wait," he ordered. "We need to check for traps, booby traps." "There are children down there," Thomas argued. "We don't have time." 2 minutes, the team leader insisted. 2 minutes to make sure we don't all get killed trying to save them. Those 2 minutes felt like an eternity to Thomas. He held Zeus back as the tactical officers checked the entrance and the first few steps, declaring them clear. Finally, they gave the signal to proceed. Thomas descended first, Zeus right beside him. The steps led to a small chamber carved out beneath the monument. His flashlight revealed 3 small forms huddled in the corner, bound with zip ties, blindfolded. "It's okay," Thomas said softly. "We're police officers. We're here to help you." One of the children, a girl, turned toward his voice. "Is it really time? Did we do it right?" "Do what right, sweetheart?" Thomas asked as he carefully removed her blindfold. She blinked in the sudden light, her pupils contracting painfully. "Breathe less. He said we had to learn to breathe less, or we'd use up all the air." Thomas felt rage boil up inside him as he gently cut the zip ties from her wrists. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. We're going to get you out of here." The tactical team helped free the other children, 2 boys, all between 7 and 10 years old. They were in worse condition than the children from the barn, having been confined in an even smaller space with less air circulation. As they were carried up the steps to waiting paramedics, Thomas noticed something tucked into a niche in the wall, a small digital timer counting down. It showed 37 minutes remaining. Beside it was a small device connected to what looked like an air pump. The implication was clear. At 0, the minimal air supply would have been cut off completely. "We made it in time," Elliot said, his voice shaky with relief. "Christ almighty, we actually made it." The children were quickly loaded into ambulances. Thomas provided what information he could to the paramedics. No food or water for at least a day, confined in a space with limited oxygen. As the ambulances pulled away, their sirens cutting through the night, he felt a momentary sense of relief. But Zeus was still agitated, still searching, moving to another part of the cemetery with single-minded determination. "Zeus?" Thomas called. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't respond, continuing toward an older section of the cemetery where simpler headstones tilted at odd angles, many of them so weathered their inscriptions had long since faded. Thomas followed, calling to Elliot over his shoulder. "Zeus has something else. We've cleared the monument," Elliot called back. "The device was set for those 3 kids." "I know, but he's onto something else." Zeus led them to a simple grave marked by a small stone cross. The grave itself seemed unremarkable, an older plot with a weathered headstone bearing the name Patterson. The surname sent a jolt through Thomas. Patterson, Noah's mother's maiden name. Zeus began digging frantically at the grave, dirt flying from beneath his paws. "Zeus, stop!" Thomas commanded. But for the first time since he'd owned the dog, Zeus ignored him completely, continuing to dig with desperate intensity. The tactical team caught up, shining their lights on the scene. "What's he doing?" Elliot asked. "That's an actual grave. We can't disturb it." "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "But I've never seen him like this." As Zeus continued to dig, his paws hit something solid. Not a coffin, but what appeared to be a metal box, just a few inches below the surface. Thomas knelt beside him, helping to clear away more dirt. It was a steel case, about the size of a small footlocker, with a digital lock on the front. "What the hell?" Elliot muttered. The tactical team moved in, examining the box carefully for booby traps. Finding none, they focused on the digital lock, a keypad requiring a 6-digit code. "We need the bomb squad for this," the team leader said. Thomas stared at the name on the headstone, Patterson. A horrible suspicion was forming in his mind. "Try 071007, he said. The tactical officer looked at him questioningly. "July 10th, 2007, Thomas explained. "The day my son died." The officer punched in the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside the case was a tablet computer set up to play a video. Thomas recognized Richard Gaines's face immediately as the first frame froze on the screen. "Is it safe to play?" he asked the tactical officer. After a brief examination, the officer nodded. "It's just a video file. No other connections or triggers that I can see." Thomas pressed play. Gaines's face filled the screen, his expression calm, almost pleasant. "Hello, Deputy Marshal," he began. "If you're watching this, congratulations. You've saved the children at the cemetery, just as you saved that girl at the lake all those years ago." His smile widened, became something ugly. "Of course. You couldn't save everyone, could you? You couldn't save your son. And now you can't save them all." Thomas felt his blood run cold. "You took everything from me," Gaines continued. "My career, my reputation, my future, and most importantly, my son. Jason was my world, Deputy Marshal, my only child. When his addiction started, I tried to help him. I was helping him. Until you and the others took away my license, my ability to practice. Without me, without the medication I was providing, Jason turned to street drugs, the same drugs that eventually killed him." Gaines leaned closer to the camera. "You see, Deputy, we're not so different. We both lost our sons. The difference is, your actions directly led to my loss. So I decided it was only fair that you experience what I experienced, watching helplessly as a child suffers." Gaines's expression changed, became almost regretful. "But then I discovered something interesting. Your son had a child. A son you never knew about, Noah." He smiled again. "I couldn't believe my luck when Rebecca brought Noah to me for counseling. Your grandson, in my office, telling me all about his nightmares, his fears. So trusting." Thomas's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the tablet. "I had a choice to make," Gaines continued. "I could take Noah from you, permanently, an eye for an eye. But then I thought, wouldn't it be more poetic for you to find him, to save him, only to realize you couldn't save them all? Because, Deputy, while you've been focused on the cemetery, the clock has been ticking elsewhere too." Thomas looked up at Elliot in horror. "The other locations, the water treatment plant, the old church." "Yes," Gaines said on the video as if answering him. "The children of Judge Haramman, who led the board that revoked my license, the son of Dr. Lydia Chen, who testified about my inappropriate methods, all hidden, all running out of air." He checked his watch on the video. "In fact, Deputy, I believe you have approximately 45 minutes before the air supply is cut off at the water treatment plant. Can you save them too? Or will you have to choose, just as I had to choose which child to save when my life fell apart?" The video ended with Gaines smiling directly into the camera. "Time's running out, Deputy. Tick-tock." Thomas was already on his feet, running toward the cruiser, Zeus at his heels. "Elliot!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Get teams to the water treatment plant and the old church. Now!" As he threw himself into the driver's seat, Thomas glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:35 a.m. If Gaines's timeline was accurate, the air would run out at the water treatment plant around 2:20 a.m. The plant was on the other side of the county, at least a 30-minute drive, even with lights and sirens. It would be close. Too close. Zeus settled into the back seat as Thomas floored the accelerator, the cruiser fishtailing slightly on the gravel road before finding purchase. The cemetery fell away behind them as they raced into the night, the dashboard clock ticking inexorably forward. Thomas found himself making the same desperate bargain he'd made 15 years ago when divers were searching for Michael's body. "Please," he whispered to whoever might be listening. "Not again, please, not again." The abandoned Oak Ridge water treatment plant loomed against the night sky like a concrete fortress, built in the 1960s and decommissioned 15 years ago when a newer facility opened upriver. It sat on 10 acres of overgrown land, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. Warning signs hung at intervals, their red lettering faded but still legible. Danger. No trespassing. County property. Thomas slammed the cruiser to a halt at the main gate, the headlights illuminating a heavy padlock and chain. The dashboard clock read 1:58 a.m. just over 20 minutes left, if Gaines's timeline was accurate. Zeus was already alert in the back seat, sensing Thomas's urgency. As Thomas grabbed bolt cutters from the trunk, the dog whined, eager to be released to begin the search. The chain gave way with a metallic snap, and Thomas pushed the gate open wide enough for the cruiser to pass through. He could see headlights in his rearview mirror, backup units following his path, but they were still minutes away, and minutes had become precious currency. "Come on, boy," Thomas said, releasing Zeus from the back seat. "Find them." The dog didn't hesitate, immediately putting his nose to the ground and moving forward with purpose. Thomas followed, flashlight in one hand, service weapon in the other. He didn't expect to encounter Gaines, the man was dead, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there might be one final trap waiting. The main building rose 5 stories with a maze of smaller structures surrounding it, pump houses, filtration tanks, chemical storage facilities. Zeus led Thomas toward the central building where concrete had begun to crack and spall, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. The main entrance was secured with another padlock, newer than the one at the gate. Thomas made quick work of it with the bolt cutters, pushing open the heavy door to reveal a cavernous space filled with silent machinery. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing hulking shapes of pumps and filtration equipment, now still and rusting. Zeus didn't pause, moving confidently through the space, following some scent Thomas couldn't detect. The dog led him past the main floor equipment, toward a stairwell descending into darkness. Thomas's radio crackled. "Marshal, this is Elliot. We're on site. What's your location?" "Main building, heading to the basement level," Thomas replied. "Zeus is tracking." "Copy that. Teams are spreading out to search other buildings. Be advised, we've got SWAT entering the church location now." Thomas acknowledged, then focused on following Zeus down the concrete steps. The air grew colder, damper, as they descended, carrying the musty smell of stagnant water and decay. At the bottom of the stairs, a long corridor stretched before them, lined with doors on either side. Offices, storage rooms, mechanical spaces. Zeus moved swiftly, with the certainty of a creature following an invisible trail. Thomas's flashlight beam bounced along the walls, revealing peeling paint and clusters of pipes overhead. They passed room after room, Zeus showing no interest until they reached the far end of the corridor. There, the dog stopped before a heavy metal door marked Filtration Control. Unlike the other doors they'd passed, this one had a new padlock securing it, shiny brass against rusted metal. Thomas's heart pounded as he positioned the bolt cutters. The lock broke with a satisfying snap, and he pushed the door open, Zeus darting past his legs into the room beyond. The beam of Thomas's flashlight revealed a large circular chamber dominated by an empty filtration tank sunk into the floor, a concrete pit about 15 feet across and 10 feet deep. As the light swept across the room, Thomas spotted what he was looking for, and what he had dreaded finding. In the center of the empty tank lay 2 small forms, bound and blindfolded like the children at the cemetery. Beside them, mounted on the wall of the tank, was a digital timer identical to the one they'd found earlier. It showed 14:22 and counting down. "I've found them," Thomas shouted into his radio. "Filtration control room, basement level, 2 children, alive." He holstered his weapon and quickly descended the metal ladder into the tank, Zeus jumping down ahead of him. The children flinched at the sound of his approach, huddling closer together. "It's okay," Thomas said, keeping his voice gentle despite his racing heart. "I'm Deputy Marshal with the Sheriff's Department. We're here to help you." He removed their blindfolds first. 2 boys, perhaps 9 and 11, blinked up at him in the sudden light. Their faces were dirty, tear-streaked, but they appeared physically unharmed. Thomas quickly cut the zip ties binding their wrists and ankles. "Can you tell me your names?" he asked as he worked. "Tyler," the older boy whispered. "Tyler Haramman. This is my brother Sam." Haramman, just as Gaines had said in the video, the children of the judge who had revoked his license. "We're going to get you out of here, Tyler," Thomas assured him. "Can you stand?" The boy nodded, though his legs were wobbly from being bound for so long. Thomas helped them both to their feet, looking up at the ladder. It would be difficult to carry them up one at a time while they were so weak. His radio crackled again. "Marshal, what's your status?" "I've got 2 boys, Judge Haramman's sons. They're alive but weak. I need assistance getting them up from this tank." "On our way to your location now." Thomas turned his attention back to the timer on the wall. 12:17 remaining. He examined it more closely and saw that it was connected to a small air pump mounted near the ceiling of the tank, similar to the setup at the cemetery. When the timer reached 0, the pump would shut off, and whatever air supply it was providing to another location would be cut. "Tyler, did the man who brought you here say anything about other children? Other places?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide. "He said we were part of a game, that police would have to choose who to save." "Did he mention where the other children might be?" Tyler shook his head, but his younger brother spoke up. "The church," Sam said. "He told someone on the phone that the special ones were at the church." Thomas immediately radioed Elliot. "SWAT needs to focus on the church location. There are more children there." "They're already inside, searching room by room." Thomas heard footsteps in the corridor and turned to see 2 deputies appear in the doorway above. With their help, the boys were quickly lifted from the tank and wrapped in emergency blankets. Paramedics had arrived and were waiting to transport them to the hospital. But Thomas's mind was already on the next location. He checked his watch. 2:07 a.m. The timer on the wall now showed 10:38. If his theory was correct, that meant the air supply to the church location would be cut off around 2:18 a.m., just 11 minutes from now. "I need to get to the church," he told Elliot as the sergeant arrived on scene. "SWAT has it covered, Tom. You've done enough." "No." Thomas shook his head firmly. "Gaines set this up as a personal vendetta against me. These are all connected to people who testified against him, who took away his license. I need to be there." Elliot looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded. "Go. I'll handle things here." Thomas raced back to his cruiser, Zeus at his heels. The old First Baptist Church was about 5 minutes away under normal circumstances. A Victorian-era building that had been abandoned when the congregation built a larger facility across town. Thomas covered the distance in 3 minutes, lights flashing and siren wailing. The scene at the church was controlled chaos. SWAT vehicles surrounded the building, officers in tactical gear moving purposefully around the perimeter. Thomas spotted the team commander and approached him quickly. "What's the situation?" "We've cleared the main sanctuary and most of the annex," the commander replied. "No sign of children yet. Still checking the basement and bell tower." "How many officers inside?" 2 teams, 6 officers total." Thomas nodded, his eyes on Zeus. The dog was already alert, straining toward the church building. "I need to go in with my K9, Thomas said. He found the children at the other 2 locations. The commander hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Go ahead. But stay on the radio." Thomas released Zeus, giving him the search command. The dog bolted toward the church, not toward the main entrance where SWAT had entered, but around the side of the building to a small door that might once have been a private entrance for the pastor. The door was locked, but Zeus was insistent, pawing and whining. Thomas used the bolt cutters again, forcing his way inside. They entered a narrow hallway that led to what appeared to be an office or study, furnished with an ancient desk and bookshelves still lined with moldering volumes. Zeus didn't pause, moving through the room to another door, this one ajar. Beyond it, a narrow staircase spiraled upward toward the bell tower. Thomas radioed his location to the SWAT team as he began to climb, Zeus leading the way. The stairs seemed endless, winding higher and higher until Thomas's legs burned with the effort. At the top, they emerged onto a small platform where the church bell still hung, silent for decades. The space was empty. Zeus, however, wasn't interested in the bell. He moved to the far side of the platform, where a small hatch in the floor might once have allowed access for maintenance. The hatch was new, though, fresh wood against the weathered planks of the platform. Thomas checked his watch. 2:15 a.m. 3 minutes left, if the pattern held. He pried open the hatch with his flashlight, revealing another ladder descending into darkness. Without hesitation, Zeus jumped down, disappearing from view. Thomas followed, the ladder creaking under his weight as he descended into what appeared to be a small chamber built into the church's ceiling, between the bell tower and the main sanctuary. His flashlight revealed a space no more than 6 feet square, with a low ceiling that forced him to crouch. And there, in the center of the space, lay 3 small forms, 2 girls and a boy, bound and blindfolded like the others. On the wall hung another timer, 01:47 and counting down. Thomas quickly radioed his location, then set to work removing blindfolds and cutting zip ties. The children were in worse condition than those at the water treatment plant, dehydrated, weak, barely conscious. "It's okay," he murmured as he worked. "You're safe now. We've got you." One of the girls, perhaps 10 years old, looked up at him with unfocused eyes. "Are you real?" she whispered. "Or another dream?" "I'm real," Thomas assured her, his voice cracking. "And we're going to get you out of here." He could hear SWAT officers making their way up the bell tower stairs, but he knew they wouldn't reach them before the timer hit 0. Whatever was going to happen, he and Zeus would face it with these children. The timer ticked down, 01:10, 01:09, 01:08. Thomas examined the device more closely. Like the others, it was connected to what appeared to be an air pump, but this setup was more elaborate. Tubes ran from the pump into the floor, disappearing into the church ceiling below. "What happens when the timer reaches 0? He asked the girl who had spoken. She shook her head weakly. "The bad man said the angels would come for us then." Thomas felt a chill run through him. He redoubled his efforts to free the children, but they were too weak to climb the ladder on their own. He would have to carry them up one at a time, and there wasn't enough time for that. 00:45, 00:44, 00:43. SWAT officers were getting closer. He could hear them on the stairs, but they wouldn't make it in time. Thomas made a decision. Gathering the 3 children close, he positioned himself between them and the timer. Zeus curled protectively around them. Whatever was about to happen, he wouldn't let these children face it alone. 00:10, 00:09, 00:08. "Close your eyes," he told the children. "It's going to be okay." 00:03, 00:02, 00:01, 00:02. The timer emitted a soft beep, and then nothing. Thomas held his breath, waiting for some trap to spring, some final act of vengeance from beyond the grave. But there was only silence. Then a soft hissing sound drew his attention, not from the timer or the pump, but from the floor beneath them. The tubes that disappeared into the floor were releasing some kind of gas. Thomas's heart raced. Poison gas? A final murderous trap? But Zeus, with his far more sensitive nose, showed no signs of distress. Instead, the dog seemed almost relieved, lying more relaxed beside the children. One of the SWAT officers finally reached the hatch above, shining a powerful light down into the chamber. "Deputy Marshal, status?" 3 children, alive but in need of immediate medical attention, Thomas reported. "And there's some kind of gas being released from the floor." The officer's training kicked in immediately. "Evacuate now." We'll send down respirators." But Thomas paused, something nagging at his mind. The timer, the pump, the tubes in the floor, they weren't what he'd initially assumed. They weren't cutting off air. They were maintaining it. And now that the timer had reached 0, that air was escaping. He suddenly understood with terrible clarity. This chamber wasn't the final trap. It was a viewing box. "Get rope," he called up to the SWAT officer. "A lot of it, and pry bars. There are more children below us, in the ceiling of the sanctuary." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of desperate activity. SWAT officers broke through the sanctuary ceiling, revealing a sealed chamber built between the decorative plaster and the actual roof. Inside, 5 more children lay unconscious but alive, in a space that had been slowly running out of air. Gaines's cruel game became clear. The timers at the cemetery and water treatment plant hadn't just been countdowns for those locations, they had been controlling the minimal air supply to this hidden chamber in the church. As each timer reached 0, another portion of the air supply was cut off. The children Thomas had found in the small observation chamber had been positioned to watch as the others slowly suffocated, just as Gaines had been forced to watch his son deteriorate after losing his license. The symbolism wasn't lost on Thomas. Gaines had recreated his own personal hell and tried to force others to experience it. All 5 children from the sanctuary ceiling were alive, though barely. They were rushed to waiting ambulances, oxygen masks covering their small faces. Thomas watched them go, a mixture of relief and horror washing over him. They had found them all the children Gaines had hidden. 10 in total, all connected to people involved in the revocation of his license. As Thomas finally emerged from the church, exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. Zeus pressed against his leg, offering silent support as always. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn after the longest night of Thomas's life. His phone rang. Dr. Winters from the hospital. "Deputy Marshal? I thought you should know. The DNA results came back. Noah is indeed your grandson. Michael's son." Thomas closed his eyes, emotions too complex to name washing through him. "Thank you, Doctor. How is he?" "Asking for you. And the dog." There was a pause. "There's something else you should know. Noah's mother, Rebecca Gaines, arrived at the hospital about an hour ago. She's completed her rehab program and wants to see her son." A new anxiety gripped Thomas. Would he lose Noah now, just as he'd found him? "I'm on my way," he said. As Thomas drove back to the hospital, Zeus sleeping exhausted in the back seat, the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. A new day was beginning, one that would bring its own challenges and revelations. But for now, Thomas held on to one simple truth. They had found the children, all of them. No one had had to choose who lived and who died. Gaines had failed in his final terrible revenge. The hospital corridor hummed with activity as Thomas approached Noah's room. Officers stood guard outside each of the rescued children's doors, their faces showing a mixture of vigilance and relief. Medical staff moved purposefully between rooms, caring for children who had spent far too long in darkness. Thomas paused outside Noah's door, suddenly uncertain. Zeus, sensing his hesitation, pressed against his leg in silent encouragement. Through the half-open door, Thomas could see 2 women in conversation. Dr. Winters and a younger woman with honey-blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans with a simple blouse, her face showing the strain of recent hardship, but with an underlying strength that reminded Thomas with a jolt of his late wife Eleanor. This must be Rebecca Gaines, Noah's mother, Michael's, what, girlfriend? Thomas realized he knew nothing about her, about the relationship she might have had with his son 15 years ago. Noah spotted him first, his small face lighting up. "Deputy Marshal! Zeus!" The women turned, conversation halting. Dr. Winters offered a small, encouraging smile, but Rebecca's expression was more complex. Uncertainty, wariness, perhaps a hint of recognition. Thomas entered the room slowly, Zeus padding faithfully beside him. "Hello, Noah. How are you feeling today?" "Better," the boy said. "They gave me chocolate pudding for breakfast." Despite everything, Thomas found himself smiling. "That sounds like a pretty good deal." Dr. Winters cleared her throat gently. "Deputy Marshal, this is Rebecca Gaines, Noah's mother. Rebecca, this is Deputy Thomas Marshall." Rebecca stood, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Thank you for finding my son," she said, her voice stronger than her shaking hand suggested. "Dr. Winters has told me what you did, what you and your dog did." Thomas shook her hand. "I'm just glad we found him in time." He hesitated, then added, "I understand there may be a connection between us that goes beyond this rescue." Rebecca's eyes, hazel like Michael's had been, flickered to Noah, then back to Thomas. "Yes," she said simply, "I believe there is." Dr. Winters touched Rebecca's shoulder. "I'll give you two some privacy. Noah, I'll come check on you later, okay?" The boy nodded, his attention focused on Zeus, who had approached the bed and rested his head on the mattress, allowing Noah to stroke his ears. When the doctor had left, Thomas and Rebecca stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Would you like to sit?" Rebecca finally asked, gesturing to the chairs by the window. They settled across from each other, the morning sun streaming between them, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny constellations. "I knew who you were," Rebecca began without preamble. When my father-in-law took Noah, I suspected he might be planning something involving you, but I never imagined." Her voice broke, and she looked away, gathering herself. "You knew Michael," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca nodded. "We dated my junior year, his sophomore year of high school. It wasn't serious. At least, I didn't think it was at the time. When I found out I was pregnant, Michael had just—" She paused, searching for words. "Drowned," Thomas finished for her. "At Lake Milford." "Yes." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I was 17. Scared. I didn't tell anyone who the father was, not even my parents. They were furious, of course, wanted me to give the baby up for adoption. But once I saw Noah—" She glanced at her son, who was still occupied with Zeus. "I couldn't. He was all I had left of Michael." Thomas felt a lump forming in his throat. "Why didn't you ever contact us?" "Michael's mother and we would have helped." Rebecca looked down at her hands. "You were dealing with so much already. Michael's death, then I heard Mrs. Marshall got sick. It didn't seem right to add to that burden. And honestly, I was ashamed. I'd made so many bad choices after Noah was born. The men I dated, the jobs I couldn't keep, eventually the pills." She took a deep breath. "I didn't want Noah to know his mother was a failure." "You're not a failure," Thomas said automatically. "You're here now. You got help. Only after hitting rock bottom." Rebecca's voice was bitter. "I started using prescription painkillers after a car accident when Noah was 3. Oxy at first, then whatever I could get. When my prescriptions ran out, I found other ways to get pills. That's how I met Jason Gaines." "Richard's son," Thomas said, pieces continuing to fall into place. Rebecca nodded. "Jason was an addict too, but functional at first. He had a job, an apartment. When I told him about Noah, about Michael being his father, he seemed to accept it. We got married when Noah was 4. Her expression darkened. "That's when Richard entered our lives." "What happened?" Richard was controlling. He insisted on being involved in every aspect of our lives, especially Noah's upbringing. He was obsessed with the idea that Noah was special, that he needed special attention. When Jason's addiction worsened, Richard blamed me, said I was a bad influence. Thomas thought of the man he had briefly known in therapy, intense, judgmental, with those two bright eyes that seemed to see through you. "When did you learn about the connection between Richard and me?" he asked. Rebecca twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. "After Jason died, Richard became fixated on you. He had newspaper clippings about cases you'd worked, especially ones involving your canine partner. He talked about divine justice and coming full circle. I was too deep in my own addiction to understand what he was planning. But when he took Noah for that special trip, something inside me finally broke through. I checked myself into rehab that same day and reported Noah missing." Thomas absorbed this information, his mind racing. "Did Noah spend much time with Richard before this happened?" "Too much," Rebecca admitted. "Richard insisted on being Noah's therapist after Jason died, said he could help with the trauma. I thought—" She shook her head. "I was hardly in a position to be making good decisions then." "It's not your fault," Thomas said. "Richard was calculating, manipulative. He fooled many people, including trained professionals." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears again. "But I'm his mother. I should have protected him." Thomas thought of that day at Lake Milford, of turning his back for 5 minutes while he saved a stranger. "We can't always protect the ones we love," he said quietly, "no matter how much we want to." They sat in silence for a moment, both watching Noah, who had convinced Zeus to put a paw on the bed and was examining it with solemn concentration. "What happens now?" Thomas finally asked. "With Noah, I mean." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "I've completed my 90-day program. I'm 6 months clean now. I have a job waiting for me at the rehab center, nothing fancy, just administrative work, but it's a start. I've been approved for subsidized housing." She met his eyes directly. "I want my son back, Deputy Marshal. I want to be the mother he deserves." Thomas felt a complicated mix of emotions, admiration for this woman's determination, concern for Noah's welfare, and a selfish desire to keep his newly discovered grandson close. "I believe you," he said carefully, "and I want what's best for Noah too. But I also—" He hesitated, unsure how to express what he was feeling. "You want to be part of his life," Rebecca finished for him. "You deserve that. Noah deserves that. He should know his grandfather." Relief washed through Thomas. "Thank you." Rebecca looked down at her hands again. "There's something else you should know. Child Services will be conducting a home study before releasing Noah back to my custody. Even with my progress, my history of addiction makes things complicated. They'll be looking at all options for his placement." The implication was clear. If Rebecca was deemed unfit, Noah would enter the foster system, unless another family member stepped forward. "I would never try to take him from you," Thomas said quickly. "But if you need support, if there's any way I can help—" "Actually," Rebecca said, "I was hoping you might consider being named as Noah's legal guardian while I complete my first year of sobriety." "It would mean he could stay with you temporarily, with regular visitation for me until Child Services is satisfied that my situation is stable." Thomas was stunned. "You'd trust me with him? You barely know me." Rebecca smiled faintly. "I know enough. Michael talked about you all the time, his dad, the hero, and Noah hasn't stopped talking about you and Zeus since I arrived. Besides," her expression grew serious, "Noah has been through enough trauma. He needs stability, security. From what I've seen, you can provide that." Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Elliott. Forensics finished at cemetery. Need you at station ASAP. More discoveries. Thomas excused himself, promising to return later. As he and Zeus headed for the exit, he glanced back to see Rebecca sitting on the edge of Noah's bed, their heads bent together in conversation, sunlight turning their matching blonde hair to gold. At the station, Thomas found Elliot waiting with a grim expression. "What's going on?" he asked, fatigue making his voice rough. "Forensics found something else buried at the cemetery," Elliot said, "near that Patterson grave where Zeus found the lockbox." Thomas felt a chill of foreboding. What was it? Records, journals, photographs. Elliot led him to a conference room where evidence bags covered the table. Gaines had been planning this for years, Tom, methodically targeting children connected to everyone involved in his license revocation. Judge Haramman's sons, Dr. Chen's daughter. The list goes on. Thomas examined the evidence. A leather-bound journal filled with Gaines's precise handwriting, detailing grievances and revenge fantasies. Photographs of the children, clearly taken with a telephoto lens as they played in schoolyards or parks. Maps marked with the locations they'd already discovered. He was watching them all, Thomas murmured. Stalking them. Planning exactly how to take them, where to hide them. "It gets worse," Elliot said, pushing forward a particular evidence bag containing what appeared to be a child's toy. A small, worn baseball glove. Thomas recognized it instantly. "That's Michael's," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From Little League. I thought it was buried with him." "There's a note attached," Elliot said quietly. Thomas read the handwritten card tied to the glove. "A memento for you, deputy, of the son you failed to save. Now you have 10 more failures to contemplate." Fury and grief warred within him. He planned for us to fail, Thomas realized. The timers, the multiple locations, he never expected us to find them all in time. "But we did," Elliot reminded him. "Thanks to you and Zeus, all 10 children are alive and recovering." Thomas nodded, but a nagging doubt remained. What if there are more? What if we missed something? Elliot shook his head. "Forensics has been through everything. The journal accounts for all 10 children we found. There's nothing to suggest others." Thomas wasn't convinced. Zeus was agitated at the cemetery even after we found the lockbox, like he was still sensing something. "Tom, you and that dog have been going for over 24 hours straight. You're both exhausted. It's natural for him to be on edge after everything that's happened." Thomas wanted to argue, but found he didn't have the energy. Elliot was probably right. They had rescued all the children. Gaines's terrible plan had failed. It was over. He returned to the hospital that evening after grabbing a few hours of restless sleep. Zeus had refused to leave his side, sleeping at the foot of Thomas's bed as if standing guard against nightmares. Noah was sitting up in bed when they arrived, color returning to his face. Rebecca sat nearby reading a book aloud, one of Michael's old favorites, Thomas noted with a pang. She had gone to her temporary housing to collect some of Noah's things, and had stopped by Thomas's house at his invitation to gather a few items that had belonged to Michael. "Deputy Marshal!" Noah's face lit up. "Zeus, look what Mom brought me." He held up a faded baseball cap with the Little League logo, Michael's old cap that Thomas had kept in a box in the attic. "That looks good on you," Thomas said, his throat tight with emotion. Rebecca gave him a gentle smile. "I hope you don't mind. Noah wanted to know more about his father." "I don't mind at all." Thomas sat in the chair beside the bed, Zeus settling at his feet. "In fact, I have plenty more stories about your dad when you're ready to hear them, Noah." The boy's eyes widened. "Was he really a baseball star?" Thomas chuckled. "Well, he thought he was. Truth is, he couldn't hit a curveball to save his life, but boy, could he field." Nothing got past him at shortstop. They spent the next hour sharing stories. Thomas recounting Michael's childhood adventures, Rebecca adding her own memories of the boy she had known briefly but intensely. Noah soaked it all in, his expression serious, as if memorizing every detail of the father he would never meet. When Noah finally began to doze off, Thomas and Rebecca stepped into the hallway to continue their conversation. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Thomas said, "about being Noah's guardian during your recovery." Rebecca looked at him expectantly, hope and anxiety mingling in her expression. "I'd be honored," Thomas continued, "but I want to be clear. This isn't about replacing you. It's about giving Noah stability while you get back on your feet." Relief flooded Rebecca's face. "Thank you. That's exactly what I want too." They discussed logistics, Thomas's work schedule, Rebecca's visitation, Noah's eventual schooling. As they talked, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond his job, beyond even his work with Zeus. For the first time since Eleanor died, he was making plans for a future that felt meaningful. As they were wrapping up their conversation, Dr. Winters approached with a tablet in hand. "I have Noah's final test results," she said. "Everything looks good physically. He's recovering remarkably well." "And emotionally?" Rebecca asked, the concern of a mother evident in her voice. Dr. Winters' expression grew more serious. "That's a longer road. He's experienced significant trauma. He'll need ongoing therapy, a stable environment, patience." "He'll have all that," Thomas assured her. "Between Rebecca and me, and with professional help, Noah will have everything he needs." Dr. Winters nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else. Something unusual in Noah's blood work that I wanted to discuss with you both." Thomas felt a flicker of alarm. "Is he sick?" "No, nothing like that. It's a genetic marker, the same one I mentioned before that connects him to your family, Deputy. But there's more to it." She showed them the tablet, pointing to highlighted sections of a medical report. "This particular combination is extremely rare. It's associated with heightened sensory perception, particularly auditory processing." "What does that mean exactly?" Rebecca asked. "In simple terms, Noah likely hears things others can't. Subtle sounds, frequencies at the upper or lower ranges of normal human hearing. It's not superhuman," she added quickly, seeing Thomas's expression. "Just at the far end of the normal spectrum, like having perfect pitch, but for all sounds." Thomas thought of Noah in that hole beneath the barn, whispering about Zeus. "He heard us when no one else did." "Could he have heard Zeus from underground?" Thomas asked. "Would that be possible with this condition?" Dr. Winters considered. "It's possible. Dogs can produce sounds at frequencies humans normally can't detect. If Noah can hear in those ranges, and if there was any kind of air passage between the surface and that underground chamber," she shrugged. "I can't say for certain, but it's not outside the realm of possibility." The implications washed over Thomas. Noah had literally heard Zeus searching above ground, and Zeus, with his own heightened senses, had somehow detected Noah's presence below. Two beings at the edges of normal perception, connecting when no one else could. "Is this hereditary?" Thomas asked, thinking of Michael. "It can be," Dr. Winters confirmed. "It would be interesting to know if Michael had similar abilities." Thomas remembered how his son had always been sensitive to sounds, complaining about the hum of fluorescent lights that no one else noticed, able to identify birds by their calls when Thomas could barely hear them chirping. "I think he did," Thomas said softly. As Thomas drove home that night, Zeus dozing in the back seat, he found his mind filled not with the horrors of the past 2 days, but with possibilities for the future. Noah would come to live with him while Rebecca continued her recovery. They would make Michael's old room into a space for the boy, with Rebecca's input on his favorite colors and interests. There would be challenges, certainly. Noah would need therapy to process his trauma. Thomas would need to adjust his work schedule, perhaps even consider retirement from field duty to focus on training other K-9 handlers. Rebecca would be a regular presence in their lives as she rebuilt her relationship with her son. But for the first time in 15 years, Thomas's house would have a child's laughter in it again. For the first time since Eleanor died, the rooms wouldn't echo with silence and regret. As he pulled into his driveway, Thomas noticed his neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, watching from her porch. She had been Eleanor's closest friend, had brought food every day for a month after the funeral, had checked on Thomas regularly until he had made it clear he preferred to be left alone. To his surprise, she approached his car as he was letting Zeus out of the back seat. "Thomas," she said, her voice warm with the soft drawl of a Georgia native, "I heard about what happened, about those children you found. The whole town's talking about it, about what you and this beautiful dog did." Thomas nodded awkwardly. "Just doing our job, Mrs. Abernathy." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You're a hero, Thomas Marshall. Always have been." She hesitated, then added, "I also heard a rumor that you might be taking in one of those children. A little boy?" News traveled fast in small towns. "My grandson, actually," Thomas said, the words still feeling strange on his tongue. "Michael's son. I just found out." Mrs. Abernathy's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Thomas, Michael's boy. Eleanor would be—" Her eyes filled with tears. "She would be so happy." "I think so too," Thomas said, his own eyes stinging. "Well," Mrs. Abernathy straightened her shoulders, "you let me know what you need. That room will need curtains, I expect. And no growing boy can survive on whatever it is you've been eating all these years." Thomas found himself smiling. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I might take you up on that." As the elderly woman returned to her porch, Thomas stood for a moment in his driveway, looking at the house he had lived in for 30 years. It had been a home once, filled with children's voices and Eleanor's laughter. Then it had become a mausoleum, preserving grief like pressed flowers between the pages of a book. Now, perhaps, it could be a home again. Zeus nudged his hand, reminding him that they both needed rest. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more challenges. There were still loose ends to tie up in the investigation, decisions to be made about Noah's care, conversations to have with Martha and James about their newly discovered nephew. But for tonight, Thomas was content to know that the children were safe, that his grandson had been found, and that after 15 years of darkness, light was beginning to filter back into his life. As he unlocked his front door, Thomas whispered words he hadn't spoken in years, words Eleanor had said every night before bed, a family tradition he had abandoned after losing her. "Thank you for this day, for all its blessings and challenges. Watch over those we love, those we've lost, and those we've yet to meet." Zeus looked up at him, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to understand the significance of the moment. Then the dog trotted inside, ready to stand guard over the beginning of this new chapter. 6 months later, the Sullivan barn was gone. In its place stood a simple garden, ringed with river stones, and centered around a bronze statue of a German shepherd with one paw raised, ears alert, eyes watchful. The plaque at the base read, "For those who listen when others turn away, in honor of K9 Zeus, who heard the unheard and saved the forgotten." The dedication ceremony had drawn most of Oak Ridge County. Families of the rescued children stood in a solemn semicircle, alongside police officers, first responders, and community members who had followed the story through newspaper headlines and dinner-table conversations. The children themselves, now recovered physically, if not entirely emotionally, placed white roses at the statue's feet. Thomas stood at the edge of the gathering, Noah's small hand tucked firmly in his, Zeus sitting attentively beside them. The October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, the kind of perfect autumn day that Georgia sometimes offers as compensation for its brutal summers. "He looks just like Zeus," Noah whispered, studying the statue with serious eyes. At 7 now, he had grown an inch and gained 10 pounds in the 6 months since his rescue. The hollows in his cheeks had filled out, and his eyes no longer held that haunted, too-old look. Most days, anyway. "He does," Thomas agreed, "though the real thing is much more handsome." Zeus, hearing his name, glanced up, tail sweeping a semicircle in the fallen leaves. Rebecca stood on Noah's other side, her hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder. The past 6 months had been transformative for her as well. Steady employment at the rehab center, a small but cozy apartment, weekly therapy sessions, and most importantly, consistent presence in Noah's life. She spent every weekend at Thomas's house, slowly rebuilding her relationship with her son while respecting the bond he had formed with his grandfather. The arrangement had surprised everyone with how well it worked. Thomas had converted his home office into a bedroom for Rebecca's weekend stays. Noah had Michael's old room, redecorated with space posters and dinosaur models, but still containing a few treasured items that had belonged to the father he would never meet. A baseball glove, a rock collection, a shelf of well-loved adventure books. The three of them, plus Zeus, had formed an unconventional family unit that somehow worked. They took weekend trips to the lake, a different lake, not Milford, had Sunday dinners with Martha and her family when they visited from Atlanta, and developed a routine that provided Noah with the stability he desperately needed. The nightmares still came, of course. There were nights when Thomas would wake to Zeus's whine at his bedroom door, signaling that Noah was in distress. Together, man and dog would go to the boys' room, Thomas sitting on the edge of the bed while Zeus climbed up, against all the rules Thomas had once established, to lie beside Noah, a living security blanket that somehow kept the darkness at bay. On those nights, Thomas would often think about the other children, the 9 others who had been rescued from Gaines's twisted revenge plot. They were all in therapy, all recovering in their own ways. Thomas kept in touch with their families, receiving updates and photos, watching from a distance as they rebuilt their lives. Some were doing better than others. The 3 from the church bell tower had the longest road ahead, having come closest to death. As the dedication ceremony concluded, people began to disperse, moving toward tables laden with potluck dishes brought by community members. Thomas had been asked to say a few words but had declined. His actions and Zeus's spoke for themselves. Judge Haramman approached, his sons Tyler and Sam trailing behind him. The boys had recovered well physically, though Tyler still flinched at loud noises and Sam refused to sleep without a light on. "Deputy Marshal," the judge said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you again. What you and your K9 did." He shook his head, words failing him. Thomas shook the offered hand. "Zeus did the hard part," he said, a response he had repeated so often it had become almost automatic. Nevertheless, Judge Haramman cleared his throat. "I want you to know that I've established a foundation. The other families are involved as well. We're funding training for more search and rescue dogs, specifically for finding missing children, the first-class graduates next month." Thomas nodded his appreciation. "That's good to hear, Your Honor." The judge hesitated, then added more quietly, "I also want you to know that I think about it every day. The fact that Gaines targeted our children because of our involvement in his license revocation. If we had known what he would do—" "You did the right thing," Thomas said firmly. "Gaines was dangerous. He shouldn't have been working with vulnerable children. What happened afterward? That's on him, not on any of you." The judge seemed to take some comfort in these words. After a few more moments of conversation, he and his sons moved on, replaced by a steady stream of well-wishers and community members who wanted to thank Thomas, or, more often, pet Zeus. The dog accepted the attention with dignified patience, maintaining his seated position beside Noah, who had become increasingly protective of his canine friend in the months since his rescue. "He's getting tired," Noah informed one enthusiastic child who wanted to shake Zeus's paw for the 5th time. "He worked really hard this morning." This was true. Earlier that day, Zeus had participated in a training exercise with the department's 2 newest canine recruits, younger dogs who looked to the veteran with something like awe. At 10, Zeus was approaching retirement age for a working dog, but he showed no signs of slowing down. Thomas had begun to scale back their field deployments, focusing more on training and community outreach, but Zeus still wore his service vest with unmistakable pride. As the crowd thinned, Thomas noticed Dr. Winters making her way toward them. She had become a friend over the past months, checking in on Noah's progress regularly and sometimes joining them for dinner at Thomas's house. "Beautiful ceremony," she said, reaching them. "Though I notice you managed to avoid the spotlight again, Deputy Marshal." Thomas shrugged. "Never been one for speeches," Dr. Winters smiled, then turned more serious. "I just came from visiting Lily Andrews and her family. She's doing remarkably well, back in school, making friends. Her parents credit the therapy dog program at the hospital. Apparently, Lily bonded with one of the golden retrievers who visits the children's ward." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. All the rescued children had responded well to therapy animals. There was something about the unconditional acceptance of a dog that reached past trauma in ways humans often couldn't. "And the others?" Thomas asked. "Making progress. Some faster than others." Dr. Winters's expression softened as she looked at Noah. "This one's my star patient, though." Noah beamed at the praise, his hand still firmly in Thomas's. As the afternoon waned, they made their way back to Thomas's house, now truly a home again, for a quiet family dinner. Martha and her husband David had driven down from Atlanta with their 2 teenagers, who had embraced their newfound cousin with enthusiasm. James had flown in from California, where he was stationed with the Army Corps of Engineers, bringing exotic souvenirs and stories of far-off places that kept Noah wide-eyed with wonder. The house, that had once echoed with silence, now rang with conversation and laughter. Eleanor's presence was felt rather than mentioned, in the recipes Martha used for dinner, in the family photos that had been brought out of storage and displayed again, in the gentle traditions that had been revived, like saying grace before meals and game night on Saturdays. After dinner, while the others chatted over coffee in the living room, Thomas slipped outside to the back porch. The evening air had turned cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Zeus followed, as he always did, settling beside Thomas's chair with a contented sigh. Thomas heard the screen door open and close softly behind him. Rebecca stepped out, wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Thomas gestured to the empty chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching fireflies begin to rise from the grass like earthbound stars. "Noah seems happy," Rebecca finally said. "More at peace than I've seen him in a long time. Maybe ever." Thomas nodded. "He's a resilient kid, like his mother." Rebecca accepted the compliment with a small smile. "And his grandfather." She hesitated, then continued. "I've been offered a full-time position at the rehab center, counselor in training. It would mean more stable hours, better pay." "That's wonderful," Thomas said sincerely. "You've earned it." "Thank you." She twisted a loose thread on her cardigan, a nervous habit Thomas had come to recognize. "It also means, well, Child Services has scheduled my final home evaluation for next month. If it goes well, they'll likely approve Noah's return to my full custody." Thomas had known this day was coming. It had been the plan all along. Rebecca regaining custody once she was stable, Noah returning to live with his mother full-time. He had prepared himself for it, or thought he had. "That's good news," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Noah needs his mother." Rebecca studied his face in the fading light. "He needs his grandfather, too," she said softly, "which is why I wanted to talk to you about an idea I've had." Thomas waited, not trusting himself to speak. "My apartment lease is up in 3 months," she continued. "I've been looking at houses, nothing fancy, just small places with yards." She took a deep breath. "I was thinking of looking in this neighborhood, actually. Maybe even on this street, if anything becomes available." Thomas felt a weight lifting from his chest. "A Mrs. Cavendish down the block is moving to Florida next month. Her daughter mentioned the house will be going on the market." Rebecca's eyes widened. "The blue one with the front porch swing? Noah loves that house. He points it out every time we go for a walk." "It needs some work," Thomas cautioned. "Roof's getting old and the kitchen hasn't been updated since the 90s. I'm not afraid of a little work." Rebecca smiled. "And I happen to know a pretty handy retired mechanic who might be willing to help in exchange for regular visits with his grandson." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That could be arranged." They fell into silence again, more comfortable than before. Inside, they could hear Noah laughing at something James had said, the sound drifting through the open windows like music. "I never thanked you properly," Rebecca said suddenly. "Not just for finding Noah, but for everything after, for giving him a home when I couldn't. For not judging me for my mistakes, for—" Her voice broke slightly. "For giving me a second chance with my son." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Thomas said, thinking of his own journey from the darkness of grief to this unexpected new chapter of life. "I'm just grateful I got to know my grandson." Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "Michael would be proud of you, you know, of the grandfather you've become to his son." Thomas had to look away, blinking rapidly against the sudden moisture in his eyes. Zeus, sensing his emotion, pressed closer against his leg. The screen door opened again, and Noah bounded out, followed more sedately by Martha. "Grandpa! Mom! Aunt Martha says we can have ice cream. And James is going to show me pictures from Japan." Thomas smiled at his grandson's enthusiasm. "Is that so?" "Well, we better not keep Japan waiting." As they all moved back inside, Thomas paused in the doorway, looking back at the night sky now scattered with stars. Somewhere up there, he liked to think, Eleanor and Michael were watching, perhaps even guiding Zeus on that fateful day at the Sullivan barn. "Thank you," he whispered to the night. Zeus looked back at him from the threshold, as if checking why his human had stopped. In the warm light from the kitchen, the dog's amber eyes seemed almost to glow with understanding. "Coming, boy," Thomas said, and stepped back into the warmth of his home, closing the door on darkness. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Sunday for their planned trip to the lake. Noah was up early, eager to try out the fishing rod James had brought him from California. Thomas prepared a simple breakfast while Rebecca packed a picnic lunch. Zeus supervised it all from his favorite spot in the kitchen, where he could keep an eye on everyone. They were just loading the car when Thomas's phone rang. Sergeant Elliott, now Captain Elliott, following a well-deserved promotion. "Tom, sorry to bother you on a Sunday," Elliott began. "I know you're on leave this week, but there's a situation up in Millerville County. Missing child, 4 years old, wandered away from a family picnic near the state forest. They've been searching all night with no luck." Thomas glanced at Noah and Rebecca, already settled in the car, fishing gear packed, the day stretching before them with promise. "They're specifically asking for Zeus," Elliott continued. "His reputation has spread, you know. They've got plenty of manpower, but no K9 units with Zeus's abilities." Thomas felt the familiar pull of duty, the need to help. but he also felt the newer, equally powerful pull of family. Before he could respond, Noah rolled down his window. "Is something wrong, Grandpa?" Thomas covered the phone. "Captain Elliot needs Zeus and me to help find a missing child." Noah's face grew serious. He exchanged a look with his mother, then turned back to Thomas. "You should go," he said with the simple certainty of a child who had once been lost himself. "Zeus needs to find them." Rebecca nodded agreement. "We can postpone the lake. This is more important." Thomas felt a surge of pride in both of them. "We'll be there," he told Elliot. "Text me the coordinates." As he went inside to change into his uniform and get Zeus's service vest, Thomas reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. The darkness hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still nightmares, still difficult days. Noah still saw a therapist twice a week. Rebecca still attended recovery meetings. Thomas still sometimes woke in the night, reaching for Eleanor or listening for Michael's footsteps in the hall. But there was light now, breaking through the cracks of grief and trauma. There was family. There was purpose. Zeus stood by the door, already alert, somehow knowing they were needed again. His training harness hung on a hook nearby, next to the leash that symbolized their partnership. "Ready to find another one, boy?" Thomas asked. Zeus's tail wagged once, decisively. Thomas knelt beside the dog, meeting those amber eyes that had seen both cruelty and kindness, darkness and light. "Let's go bring them home," he said softly. Zeus pressed his muzzle briefly against Thomas's hand, a gesture of solidarity, of shared purpose. Then he stood at attention, ready to do what he did best, listen for those no one else could hear. As they walked out to the car, Noah ran up and hugged Zeus around the neck. "Find them," he whispered into the dog's ear. "Like you found me." The boy then straightened and gave Thomas a military-style salute, something James had taught him the night before. Thomas returned it solemnly, honoring the moment. Rebecca approached with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag. "Sandwiches," she explained. "You might be out there a while." "Thank you," Thomas said, meaning it for far more than the food. As he drove away, Zeus in the back seat, Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah and Rebecca stood in the driveway, waving, their figures growing smaller but no less important as distance stretched between them. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the depths of grief to this unexpected new life, from a man who had lost everything to a man who had found what he never thought to look for, a second chance. Beside him on the passenger seat, his phone buzzed with the coordinates of the search area. Ahead lay a state forest, miles of wilderness where a 4-year-old had vanished in the night. Somewhere in that vastness, a child was waiting to be found. Thomas glanced at Zeus in the rearview mirror. The dog sat alert, ready, his purpose as clear to him as it was to Thomas. "Let's go to work, partner," Thomas said. Zeus's reflection looked back at him, those intelligent eyes filled with what Thomas had come to recognize as determination. Together, they would search until they found. Together, they would bring another lost one home. That was what they did. That was who they were. Thomas turned the cruiser onto the highway, heading toward the search coordinates, the morning sun rising higher in the sky. Behind them, a home waited for their return. Ahead, a child waited to be found. It was, Thomas realized, the most complete his heart had felt in 15 years. Dear listeners, in They Thought the Barn Was Empty, we witness how life's darkest moments can lead to unexpected second chances. Like Thomas Marshall, many of us have faced devastating losses, the kind that hollow out our hearts and leave us merely existing rather than living. Yet his journey reminds us that healing often comes in forms we never anticipated. Sometimes it's through the unconditional love of a loyal companion like Zeus. Sometimes it's discovering family we never knew existed, like Noah. And sometimes it's finding purpose again when we thought that chapter was closed forever. This story speaks to the truth that it's never too late to rebuild, to form new connections, to matter deeply to someone again. The golden years of our lives can indeed be golden, not because they're free from pain or loss, but because we've earned the wisdom to recognize precious moments when they arrive. We'd love to hear, has an animal ever helped you through a difficult time in your life? Or, like Thomas, have you ever received an unexpected second chance that changed everything? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.